This is an unscripted analysis of William Friedkin's 1973 horror film, The Exorcist, based on William Peter Blatty's 1971 novel of the same name. I want to cover some of the symbolism in the film that you might find interesting. Now, this film begins in northern Iraq. The statue is discovered on this archaeological site. Now, in Assyrian and Babylonian mythology, Pazuzu was the king of the demons of the wind. Now, that is going to be very important, that this demon, Pazuzu, is the king of the wind as I progress through this analysis. But the fact that this ancient demon is unearthed in modern times, in the modern age, symbolizes an airborne virus that's ready to infect a world that's lost its immunity because of scientific advancement. Now, its immunity is synonymous with faith. This world or age also symbolizes the film's main character, Damien Karras. Now, Damien Karras is this age in human history. He's the embodiment of this age because of all of the things that he learned in college about mental illnesses that ancient civilizations used to think of as demonic possession or the supernatural. So Satan or the devil sees this modern age, or Damien Karras, who's the embodiment of this modern age, as the perfect host, in that it thinks that it knows everything and can explain everything. Another thing that I picked up in this film is the trivialization of the spirit world. The trivialization of the spirit world. In Washington, D.C. and Georgetown, on a film set called Crash Course, the main actress in this film within a film, Regan MacNeil, who happens to be the mother of Regan MacNeil, who's going to be possessed in the film later by Satan. She decides to walk home from this film set. You can tell that it's fall with the colors, but the thing that I really want you to pay attention to when you watch this film is these children. You know, because it's Halloween and they have on costumes of ghosts, of spirits. And it's as though these children wearing these costumes of these spirits in the way that this age looks at the spirit world, looks at the supernatural. You know, it's trivialized. And there's another scene in which Regan shows her mother this Ouija board through which she communicates with this imaginary friend of hers by the name of Captain Howdy. And her mother doesn't think anything about it. She doesn't think that it's dangerous or anything because it's dismissed as like a kiddie thing. So in this modern age, the spirit world, God or Satan, is trivialized, which goes along with man losing his faith also, in the fact that he is so advanced scientifically and technologically from the ancient civilizations that he no longer sees that these things as being real because they can all be explained now. There's another thing that I saw in this film too, and that is the desecration of the Virgin Mary. In that scene in which the statue of Virgin Mary is desecrated. And when I was watching that, I was thinking, Exodus 20, chapter 20 and verse 8 says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. We drink the most alcohol in this country, and you have the most parties Super Bowl Sunday. On Super Bowl Sunday, the last thing in the world you're thinking about is God, if you are a religious person. I saw the statue of Virgin Mary desecrated as a metaphor of Exodus 28. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And it's just one more way in which this modern age has dismissed the supernatural. There's another point that I want to make about something I saw in the film, and I call it from the body to the mind and finally the spirit. Now, Damien Karras represents the end result of pure scientific advancement. Now, when he and Chris first meet, Chris kind of makes a joke. She asks him, how did a shrink become a priest? And his answer is, it's the other way around, implying that he was a priest that became a shrink. When she said that, how does a shrink become a priest? If you look at the order of that sentence and the way she put shrink before a priest, that's like Damien Karras' arc in the film. Because he goes from being a shrink, which is just a pejorative way of saying a psychiatrist, to a priest, because he goes from not believing to believing. Now, his reply, how did I go from being a priest to a shrink? To me implies that when he first joined the priesthood, he believed in the supernatural. He had faith. But as he began to go to all of these different schools, he began to study all of these different areas of psychiatry that explained things that the ancient civilizations looked at as supernatural or spiritual or God or the devil. He lost his faith because he began to see all of these things that used to be unexplainable as explainable. Okay, now I want to touch on another point, how science has replaced God. If you look at the priests and you look at where those priests perform their duties, the church, it's like an inversion, because that church represents the ancient world and the hospital represents the modern world. So the church has been replaced by the world of understanding, the world of science, the world of seeing things not spiritually, but seeing things physically. Regan, she's going to be treated physically, but not spiritually in this new church. So science has replaced God in this new age. So I'm going to move on to Lucifer's rebellion. There's a scene in this film where Chris invites all of her friends over for a Christmas party. Regan crashes this party by pissing on herself and saying to everybody, you're all going to die up there. See, there was a conversation that a priest had with an astronaut in this scene. An astronaut, get this, an astronaut. And then I was thinking, I said, wait a minute. The book of Isaiah, chapter 14 and 14, in which Lucifer said, I will go up to the cloud tops and I'll be like the Most High. This astronaut here, he's like a high-tech prototype of Satan the devil. This demon, Pazuzu, is also referred to the demon of the winds. He's the king of the demon of the winds. That astronaut, she was really talking to him because he was really the embodiment of this modern age. This modern age that, because of its understanding of the world, has gotten so full of hubris and so full of itself that it said, you know what? I'll go up to the clouds and be like the Most High. Doctors in these hospitals, which are like their cathedrals, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So to science, everything looks like it's something that you're supposed to be able to see and touch and discern with your senses. In the modern age, everything is seen as physical. There's a scene in which Regan tells her mother, Chris, I don't feel well. Chris is separated from her husband, who's in Rome, who didn't call Regan on her birthday. And Regan was, in that scene, you could see she was obviously distraught and upset about that. That her father wouldn't even call her and won't even answer her mother's call. It never occurs to Chris that her daughter might need to talk. She might be depressed about that. What does Chris say when her daughter tells her that she doesn't feel good? Just take some pills and everything will be all right, like the doctor said. The doctor. Now, if she was looked at holistically as a flesh and blood being, as well as a spiritual and intellectual being, her mother would have tried to address her spiritually, emotionally, and intellectually before she tried to address her physically, scientifically. Instead, her mother said, take some pills, like the doctor said, in a superficial age of hubris, man thinks that he has all of the solutions. Isaiah 14:14, when Lucifer said, let us go into the clouds and be like the Most High, man think he's God. Because he think that all of the solutions come from him and his understanding of science. Instead of talking to her daughter and trying to understand why she was acting the way that she was acting, instead of probably going to see a therapist, instead of reaching out to her in a way that didn't involve looking at her as a thing, her mother took her to the hospital that's set up to look at her superficially. They are looking for the same thing that Damien Karras in the film looks for. Those doctors are looking for a sign. That's right. They're looking for a sign. In the book of Matthew, chapter 12 and verse 39 through 42, an evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. Those doctors represent man looking for a sign. When Chris took Regan to that hospital, the roles changed. Instead of Damien Karras, now it is the doctors who represent mankind, the modern age, in that they are looking for a sign. Let me read that again. Matthew chapter 12 and verse 39 through 42. An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. When they were looking for a sign by submitting Regan to all of those brutal x-rays and spinal taps, all the pain that she was going through, and them searching for a sign, they did not find a sign. Another example is Damien Karras, Father Karras, because that's why he resorted to alcoholism, because he's guilty about not doing enough for his mother. All those years he went and got all that education, but he did not get the type of education in which he can make a lot of money. So now he feels guilty. He's drinking all this alcohol to try to address the pain and guilt that he feels from not being able to put his mother in a decent facility where she can get the type of care that she needs. It's another point I want to make, and that's vulnerability. And that's how does the devil gain access to Regan and Damien Karras in this film in the first place? Now, in this film, demonic possession, I said before, it's like getting a cold or being infected by an airborne virus. Okay? In Assyrian and Babylonian mythology, Pazuzu was known as the king of the demons of the wind. Now, prior to Regan's strange behavior, Chris discovers her window wide open. In another scene, Bert Dennings, he comes up dead. He falls out of her window. Later, Lieutenant Kinderman, he made a comment about drafts and about germs being able to use drafts in order to enter your home. You got the window, you got this breeze, you have Pazuzu being called the king of the demons of the wind. You have this astronaut. You know, all of these things have something to do with air. And then you even have Regan's artwork. And, you know, she draw all of these pictures. These animals have wings. This comment that Lieutenant Kinderman makes randomly about germs riding on drafts, using a draft the way you would ride on a magic carpet, is a metaphor of Satan, who's like a spiritual virus in this film that attack bodies that are too weak to resist airborne infections like a cold or a flu. Regan feels guilty about her parents being separated. Damien Karras, he feels guilty about not being able to provide his mother with a better facility that could take care of her. And if he represents the modern age that has lost its faith because of its understanding of how the world works, science, then not only is he weakened by guilt, he is also weakened by hubris, by his lack of faith. His lack of faith is also hubris. And that hubris invites things in because you don't have any kind of faith. You don't have any kind of boundaries because the buck stops with you. there is no higher authority that you answer to. If you don't have a higher authority that you answer to, if you go out in society and there's no fear that you're going to have to pay any kind of penalty for anything that you do, you have anarchy. You have complete pandemonium. Any place where you see lawlessness, you see the worst in man. I want to kind of elaborate a little bit more on Regan and Karras and how they harmed themselves. Regan harms herself through self-mutilation, and Karras tortures himself with guilt. But I want to start with Regan. The reason why she mutilates herself is because she feels rejected by her father. Her father and her are separated. In the book of Genesis, when Adam ate the forbidden fruit, what did God do? He separated himself. He cut man off from the garden. He separated from man and he left man. So he left man and he left earth. And earth received a new king. And that was the one that man obeyed. And that was Satan. So I see the separation of Regan from her father is the separation of man from God. And when she mutilated herself the way that she did in this film, that is the equivalent of the fig leaves that Adam and Eve covered themselves with after they sinned. Because you notice that after they sinned, they covered what? The book says they covered their shame. So I look at the self-mutilation on her part as her trying to hide from God. She's trying to hide herself from God because she's ashamed. And also the fact that her father doesn't even speak to her mirrors the way that we say in this modern age, God was speaking to those people back in ancient times, but why isn't he speaking to us now and doing all these miracles the way he used to do in ancient times? Now I want to talk about Damien Karras and how he harms himself because of his shame in not taking care of his mother and not providing a better place for her to be taken care of. The way that Regan covers herself up, her face, by hiding it under all these scars. Karras' way of hiding from God is to drink, to try to forget, to try to deaden it, because he does not feel worthy of his mother's love. You notice how Regan is estranged from her father and Karras is estranged from his mother. So the fact that he did not take care of his mom meant that man in his modern age is not taking care of planet Earth. I want to thank you for watching this video, and I will see you next time, and you take care. Thank you.